This is Damon Fordham, here to speak to you about the history of something known as the Gullah language. Now, if you lived between about, say, Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia, or the surrounding areas, you may occasionally hear people say things like, "Boy, ain't no wrong with you, better mind if I don't box you now, who do you think you is?" That is an example of Gullah. Now, for many years, there's been a misunderstanding of this concept of Gullah. It was considered to be a lower class accent by and large among the poverty-stricken and lower classes of the African Americans and some whites who were raised by African American servants in the areas between about Georgetown, South Carolina, and Charleston down to about Beaufort and Savannah, Georgia. Well, and it was also dismissed as bad English, but here are the facts of the matter. Our story begins in the West African nation of Sierra Leone, where you have these tribes known as the Gullahs, that's G-O-L-A-S, and the Gizes, that's sometimes G-I-Z-Z-E-S. And these tribes were known for their skills of growing rice. Meanwhile, here in South Carolina, between about around Berkeley County, there was a plantation owner and Revolutionary American War hero by the name of Henry Lawrence. Henry Lawrence owned what was then called Mepkin Plantation, which is today a monastery in Cordsville, South Carolina, right outside of Moncks Corner. And Henry Lawrence tried to grow rice on his plantation, but he wasn't very successful. He began to get in communication with a man by the name of Richard Oswald, an Englishman who owned a slave dungeon off the coast of Sierra Leone known as Bunce Island. So Henry Lawrence and Richard Oswald got into this partnership, whereas Richard Oswald would capture the Africans and keep them in the island as slaves and sell them to his various plantations, and Henry Lawrence would get a cut by selling these folks to other places. So with these folks taken directly from this area around Sierra Leone and Liberia, where the Gullahs and Gizes and also the Mendes were, they would take them directly to the Sea Islands and sometimes to Barbados and Bahamas and areas such as that. Well, as they were taken here, something very interesting happened. Usually when blacks were brought to the rest of the United States as slaves, they tended to be outnumbered by the whites, and so therefore they adapted a lot of the white culture into their speech and mannerisms. Not so much with these folks. These folks along the Sea Islands and the areas around Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, Beaufort County and Jasper County, and going into the coastal regions of Savannah, the Sea Island areas, they were basically had very few whites, so they outnumbered the whites and kept a lot of their African ways of doing things. They made these wonderful baskets out of sweetgrass. They also continued to eat a lot of rice, and they did some interesting burial practices. For example, when someone died, they would take a baby and hand the baby to someone over the grave. The idea was to keep the evil spirits from bothering them. They would also do this thing called libation, where after someone died, they would drink some water or wine or whatever, and then they would pour it out. They would pour it out to the ground in memory of those departed. Sound familiar? Think of how today you see African American men sometimes gathered, sometimes on street corners or in front of corner stores, and they'll pour out the wine for the brothers who aren't there. It's the same concept. Anyway, they also kept more of their African speech than any other black people brought to the United States, with the possible exception of those around Louisiana. They would call older women names like Yaya, which meant mother, and referred to some men as Baba, which is father. Now, this somewhat translates into the Bubba in modern American English, among other things. So, anyway, the problem was that these folks, when left alone, they continued to speak their African ways. They would say things like, "How do you come over here to bring us wheat beer, yeah?" and things of that sort. And people would say, "Oh, that is so country." And they looked down on these folks. And what would often happen is that they would go to college and places like that, and they would say, "Man, these books y'all cost too much. I ain't got money for pay for this kind of thing, yeah." These books cost too much and I don't have money to pay for this type of thing. And other people would say, "Oh, you sound so geeky, and oh, it's so country. Why don't you stop talking like that?" And this led to an inferiority complex among the folks who spoke Gullah. And they would even go to their regular schools, and the teachers would say, "Oh, stop talking like that. That's such bad English." So for many years, other people from other parts of the United States would ridicule those who spoke Gullah. And although the myth that the language is in danger of dying out, that's basically is not really true. Because you see in Charleston and many of these areas, a lot of these people were in poverty, and so therefore their main concern was living from one day to the next and how they spoke. Plus, it was only when you had cases of upward mobility that people tried to stop speaking like this. So anyway, this affair of things continued until the advent of a man by the name of Dr. Lorenzo Turner, a graduate of Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. In the summer of 1932, he came to teach at the South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And in his class, he had a couple of young ladies. One of them said something to the effect of, "Man, Dr. Turner, this class shot too long. We won't get out y'all." And he said, "My goodness, what did you just say?" "Man, I said, tired of this class, Dr. Turner. When will we get out y'all?" "Oh, my goodness. Madam, I must ask you this. Where are you from?" "I'm from Jones Island, South Carolina. Why to ask me that?" "Oh, my goodness. Madam, I must get over there and interview some of your folks. My goodness, this sounds so interesting." And he interviewed the people, and he suspected that what he was hearing was not bad English as so many people believe, but an actual survival of African cultures. Well, he struck the jackpot when he went down to Georgia. And as a matter of fact, he recorded that incident in his book, Africanisms and the Gullah Dialect. When he went down to a place called Harris Neck, Georgia, and met a lady by the name of Amelia Dolly. And Amelia Dolly was able to sing this song that was purely African, that went as follows. "Awaka mumene kayamba yile yile tambe. Awaka mumene kayamba yile yile tambe." And Dr. Turner heard this and said, "My goodness, madam, what is that you're singing?" "Oh, my great-grandmother sang that thing when I was a little gal." Her great-grandmother sang this thing when she was a little girl. And so he said, "Madam, I must ask you this. Did your great-great-grandmother come directly from Africa?" Yeah, she did. How you didn't know that?" He goes, "Eureka!" And he realized that connection. See, what he heard was the funeral song of the Mende people of the area around Sierra Leone and Liberia. And that proved his thesis that Gullah was not exactly this language of backwardness and ignorance, but a continuation of African ways of speaking. But however, he wrote about it in this book called Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect by Dr. Lorenzo Turner, Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect. But unfortunately, this book was read mostly among scholars. It was not that widely known to the general public. Then, however, another scholar by the name of Joseph Opala, that's O-P-A-L-A, that is, he went over to that region again sometime in the 1980s and found Mary Moran, who was Amelia Dolly's granddaughter. And as it turned out, Mary Moran was able to sing that same song. And he said, "My goodness, madam, do you know what this is?" And she said, it was a song that was passed down through the generations. Well, he managed to take this lady over to West Africa, and they found people of the Mende tribe. And so she got up in front of them and sang, "Awaka mumene kayamba yile yile tambe, awaka mumene kayamba yile yile," and so forth. And a lady who spoke Mende that they found responded as follows. "Hasa wali and go and like a younger yile, hasa wali and go yile and daka." And basically what you heard went like this. The first lyrics went, "In the evening we are suffering because the grave is not yet cool. In the evening we are suffering for the grave is not yet cool." And the response was, "Death will quickly destroy the tree and its remains will disappear slowly. Death will quickly destroy the tree and the heart will soon rest." Basically, this was the funeral song of the Mendes that was passed down through the generations. And so basically that proved the connection between the Gullah of West Africa as well as the Gullah of this area as well as the languages of West Africa. Then a General Joseph Momo around 1989 came to St. Helena's Island at the Penn Center, which is near Beaufort, South Carolina, and he got before the people and said, "I glad to see you today." Translation, "I'm glad to see you today." And a lady responded in Gullah, "Greg, goddamn man, for talk like we." Translation, "He sounds like us." So the man who was glad to see them took the people that talk like we back to Sierra Leone. And the people on both sides were amazed at all the similarities between languages, lifestyles, and culture and so forth. They exchanged sweetgrass baskets and they spoke in pretty much the same manner, that a PBS crew went along with them and filmed a documentary that was very fittingly entitled Family Across the Sea. So the next time you hear Gullah, don't just think of this as illiteracy and backward English or all this type of thing. Think of it as the connection between the Africans of America and the Africans of West Africa. If you want to learn more about this, you could read Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner's book, Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect, which you can find in a lot of libraries and bookstores. And I wrote an article about all of this in this issue of Native Magazine, which came out in the fall of 2010, which is available in the city of Charleston, South Carolina. So that's my little moment about the story of the family across the sea regarding the blacks of America and the blacks of Africa. This is Damon Fordham.